imagine running like a massive flour mill. You employ 100 people, you supply bakeries across the entire region, and you are, by all accounts, a model taxpayer.
Right, a totally legitimate operation.
Exactly. But this year, because of severe supply chain breakdowns, you make absolutely zero profit, and then the government knocks on your door, hands you a massive tax bill based entirely on the money you didn't make.
Which is wild.
It is, and it drains your last remaining cash, effectively bankrupting your company, and then they act surprised when your business completely collapses.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a clerical error, right? But it is actually a deliberate policy, and it perfectly illustrates what happens when a rigidly designed system just, collides with a really volatile reality.
Welcome to this deep dive. We are coming to you straight from the newsroom of Addis Fortune, Ethiopia's largest English weekly newspaper. We've been looking through this week's editions, and an alarming pattern is just emerging across the board.
Yeah, it's everywhere this week.
We're seeing this intense, high-stakes collision between grand government mandates, whether it's economic policy, national elections, or environmental rules, and the incredibly harsh, on-the-ground reality of citizens and businesses just trying to survive. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's start with that flour mill, because it sits right at the center of a macroeconomic paradox that's currently paralyzing the country. Recently, there was this massive meeting at the Ministry of Finance on King George VI Street.
Over 200 people, right?
Yeah, over 200 angry business owners, lawyers, lobbyists, all packed into this hall to protest new tax legislation. And to understand their anger, you have to look at the numbers that are terrifying the government. Ethiopia has been reporting average annual GDP growth of about 8%.
Which sounds like a booming economy. I mean, 8% is great.
On paper, yes, it's great.
Yep.
But the tax to GDP ratio, the actual percentage of that economic activity the government manages to collect as revenue, has plummeted.
Really?
Yeah. In the 2014-2015 fiscal year, it was at 12.4%.
Yeah.
But by this current 2023-2024 year, it had fallen to just 7.3%.
Wait, so the economy is supposedly growing by 8% a year, but the government's slice of the pie is shrinking that drastically? How does that mechanism even work? Is inflation just like masking the real numbers, or is the growth happening entirely in sectors the government can't track?
It's really a mix of both. You have this massive expanding informal economy that operates entirely in cash, completely off the books.
Right.
So the government sees the money moving, but they just can't capture it. So their solution was to amend the income tax law with some incredibly aggressive tools. They mandated that Category A and B taxpayers, essentially your medium to large registered enterprises, must make quarterly advance tax payments equal to 25% of their previous year's tax.
Wow.
But the real devastating mechanism is the minimum alternative tax, or MAT.
Right, the METN. And this demands that businesses pay 2.5% of their annual turnover. And just to be clear for you listening, turnover means total sales, not profit. They have to pay this even if the business is operating at a massive loss. Which brings us back to Mahari Adane, the man who runs that flour mill in Debri Marcos.
His story is, frankly, the human cost of this policy. His mill was built on 40,000 square meters of land. At its peak, it ran at 60% capacity and paid 10 million birr a year in profit tax.
That's a huge operation.
It was. But today, due to regional security concerns, transporters are just refusing to move goods. Wheat prices have spiked. His supply chains are entirely broken. So he is operating at like 3% capacity.
3%.
Yeah.
And because he made no profit, he logically shouldn't owe profit tax. But under the MAT, the government demanded an advance payment based on his past turnover. And he paid it, which completely wiped out his remaining working capital. Now he can't pay his staff, and he is just waiting for the bank to auction the factory.
It's a disaster.
It is, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. It's like a restaurant charging you for a meal you didn't eat just because you walked in the door. But the ministry specifically cites sectors like construction and retail as being just rife with tax evasion.
Oh, absolutely they are.
So, if you have rampant fraud where companies cook the books to show zero profit year after year, doesn't the government desperately need these blunt tools to catch real tax evaders?
What's fascinating here is the sheer mechanical failure of that exact blunt instrument. It doesn't actually hit the informal, off-the-books evaders because, well, they aren't registered in the first place.
Oh, right, because they don't have a formal turnover history on the books anyway.
Exactly. It hits the highly visible, compliant businesses who actually keep formal ledgers. When you tax turnover instead of profit during a macroeconomic shock, You aren't fighting fraud, you are confiscating working capital. You are effectively legislating visible companies out of existence, which ironically shrinks your tax base even further.
And that lack of tax revenue isn't just an accounting problem, is it? It directly paralyzes state capacity. I mean, if the federal government is starved for cash, it can't fund basic administrative functions, which explains exactly what is happening with Ethiopia's upcoming 7th national vote.
Precisely. The National Election Board of Ethiopia, or NEBI, has an electoral calendar they are desperately trying to execute. And they have managed to register over 9 million voters so far.
Okay, 9 million.
Yeah, but to put the scale of the state's paralysis into perspective, that is only about 23.5% of the total voters recorded during the last national election.
It's a massive drop-off. They have over 52,000 polling stations across the country, but 12.3% of them are sitting completely idle. And the breakdown is absolute in the Tigray regional state, where literally zero voter registration has happened. Not a single person.
Yeah, the Electoral Board claims they can't launch registration because the interim regional administration in Tigray hasn't responded to their requests. But the interim administration, which is led by the TPLF, has stated very clearly that elections cannot happen until specific conditions from the Pretoria Agreement are met.
And just for context, the Pretoria Agreement is the treaty that ended the recent conflict in the region. The interim administration is pointing to unmet terms, like the return of internally displaced people, the proper allocation of the regional budget from the federal government, and the restoration of disputed boundaries.
But, underneath that high-level political standoff is a really devastating ground-level reality. Public servants in the region haven't been paid in 2 months. They can't even cover their rent.
Wow, 2 months.
Yeah. Fuel is so scarce that transport is completely paralyzed, banks lack cash, and businesses are shuttered.
There is a quote in Addis Fortune from Fikr Tensei, a Kel resident who had to close his shop because he just couldn't get goods into the city. He said, and I quote, "Survival is the main concern. Elections are a luxury right now."
That really sums it up.
It does. If you are listening to this, put yourself in his shoes. The federal government is telling you to perform your civic duty, but you haven't been paid in 2 months, your business is dead, and you don't have fuel to get to a polling station, even if one were magically open.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see the extreme political risk of ignoring that reality. And just to be clear, we are maintaining absolute political neutrality here. We're merely reporting the viewpoints presented in the article. But we are seeing veteran politicians explicitly warning that pushing an inflexible electoral schedule onto a population that lacks basic survival needs could be the trigger for renewed conflict.
Right.
An election is supposed to be a reflection of a functioning society, not just some bureaucratic exercise imposed on top of an ongoing economic crisis.
Now, if the domestic economy is frozen and the government is struggling to collect revenue, the country desperately needs foreign exchange to keep the lights on. And Ethiopia's absolute greatest lifeline for foreign currency is its coffee exports. They just had an unprecedented, record-breaking year, pulling in $2.65 billion from 470,000 tons of coffee.
It was a massive year, and that boom was largely driven by the government implementing structural reforms, like, allowing farmers to bypass middlemen and export directly.
That's great for the farmers.
Absolutely. And it happened to perfectly time a wave of tight global supplies and really high benchmark prices.
But the global commodities market is brutal, and a massive sudden threat has materialized out of nowhere. The bottom is falling out of the global price because Brazil is experiencing an absolute glut of coffee. Market analysts project Brazil's 2027 output will hit an astronomical 75.3 million bags.
That is just an unbelievable amount of coffee.
It is. You combine that with a surge in Vietnam's Robusta exports, and the global market is suddenly drowning in beans.
Right, and this fundamentally shifts the market from tight supply to severe price compression. Ethiopia will still find buyers for its premium Highland Arabica, sure, but the per-bag price they can command internationally is dropping incredibly fast.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You would think that local prices would drop to match the global reality, right?
You'd assume so.
But local Ethiopian farmers and exporters are entirely ignoring the global crash. They are hoarding their coffee and driving the local price up to 260 birr per kilo. It's like stubbornly holding onto a winning lottery ticket while watching the jackpot shrink by the minute. Now wait. If you are listening to this, you're probably screaming at your device. How can local farmers demand more money when the global price is crashing? Who on earth is buying it at 260 birr if the exporters can't make a profit selling it abroad?
It's a localized game of financial chicken. and it is entirely driven by the desperate need for foreign currency. See, many coffee exporters in Ethiopia also run import businesses on the side.
Okay.
They need US dollars to import things like cars, electronics, or machinery, where the profit margins are massive.
Yeah.
So they will willingly buy coffee locally at an inflated 260 birr, sell it at a loss on the global market.
Wait, sell it at a loss intentionally?
Yes, intentionally at a loss just to get their hands on the US dollars required to fund their really lucrative import operations.
Wow. So they are essentially subsidizing their coffee losses with their import profits, but that artificial local demand is what's keeping the price at 260 birr, totally divorcing it from the actual global reality.
Exactly. But it's completely unsustainable. Coffee experts are warning that if exporters pay more than 140 birr a kilo, the entire system risks total collapse. The Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Authority, led by Addis Ababa, is practically begging these hoarders to sell to the central market immediately.
Before it's too late.
Right. They're warning that this low-price environment globally could last for a year and that scarcity premium is vanishing as we speak.
It's incredible. The government decentralized the market to empower farmers during a boom, but in a bust, that same decentralization means they have zero leverage to force the market to behave rationally. They've even had to set up a national task force just to stop people from smuggling the hoarded coffee out through contraband channels.
And that inability of a central authority to manage a chaotic decentralized system mirrors exactly what is happening inside the capital, Addis Ababa, regarding the environment.
Let's zoom into the micro level of city streets. Because Addis Ababa is facing a legitimate pollution crisis, the World Bank released a report showing that air quality in the city is 1.6 times worse than it was in the 1970s.
Which is terrifying.
It is. This pollution is causing around 1,600 premature adult deaths every single year, and it's costing the city an estimated $78 million in health impacts. Plus, the city generates 6 million tons of solid waste annually.
The statistics are horrifying, and the city government clearly panicked. So to fix it, district offices just send out these blanket letters ordering businesses to submit mandatory environmental and social management plans within 2 weeks.
2 weeks. But they didn't just target massive factories, did they? They sent these mandates to tiny micro enterprises. Addis Fortune highlighted Jordanis Juice, who owns the Malika African Grill. She sells maybe 10 dishes a day.
10 dishes a day.
Yeah. And to comply with this mandate, she was told she would need to hire a consultancy service to draft the technical documents. The cost, between 300,000 and 500,000 birr.
For a tiny grill.
It's absurd. It's like forcing a kid with a lemonade stand to commission a corporate environmental impact assessment. How does a city issue a $500,000 birr mandate to a 10-dish restaurant?
This raises an important question. How do you actually regulate an informal, rapidly growing city? The officials at the Addis Ababa Environmental Protection Authority basically applied industrial-scale compliance tools to microenterprises.
Right.
When you demand a 500-page corporate environmental impact assessment from a neighborhood grill, you aren't fighting pollution. You are criminalizing daily survival. They just completely ignore the mechanics of how their citizens actually live and work.
And the chaos of this rapid urbanization isn't just causing regulatory overreach, it is actively rewriting property rights.
Yeah.
The city is fundamentally shifting from single-family homes to high-density shared living. There are now over 200,000 formal private apartment units in Addis Ababa.
And because this legal framework of condominium living is just so new to the city, explosive disputes are breaking out over who controls common areas. The standard boilerplate contracts for these apartments often fail to account for external amenities.
Which leads us to the Sign View Hotel and apartments in the Kasanchis neighborhood. A developer named Kunes Nesteke owns 9 of the 19 units, plus the ground floor. She sold the other 10 to individual buyers. Well, Kunesnes decided to excavate a 195 square meter parking lot adjacent to the building to construct a hotel on the land she leased.
Right, and she claimed the excavation was totally lawful because she is the primary landholder. But 9 of the apartment buyers sued her. They claimed that under an earlier informal agreement, that parking lot came with their flats.
Imagine coming home to find the developer has literally bulldozed your parking spot.
It would be infuriating.
The buyers demanded 2 million birr to have it restored, and the lower courts actually agreed with them. But Kunesnes appealed. She argued that their formal authenticated lease contracts only granted them proportional rights to the building's internal common parts, like corridors and lifts, but absolutely not the external parking area.
Her argument was that formal written law must supersede unnotarized handshakes, which makes sense legally. But here's a massive twist. The case made it all the way to the cassation bench of the Supreme Court.
And for those unfamiliar, the cassation bench is the highest level of judicial review in the country. They only hear cases to correct fundamental errors of law.
And they refused to even review it.
Wow.
Yeah, they said the lower court's reliance on the informal agreement didn't constitute a fundamental legal error. So the ruling stands. Kunisnes retains administrative rights to the building, but she is legally barred from controlling the parking lot she excavated.
So, if the written authenticated lease didn't explicitly guarantee the parking space, but the courts gave it to the buyers anyway based on an informal understanding. Wait, what is the actual legal precedent here?
The insight here is really profound. When a city urbanizes faster than its legal code, informal historical agreements become the actual law of the land, rendering formal property titles almost useless. Veteran lawyers are sounding the alarm.
I bet they are.
If an unnotarized arrangement can override a formal contract, buyers and developers could be trapped in endless litigation over every single hallway and balcony because the written title no longer guarantees control.
So we've covered incredible ground today. We've seen a flour mill crushed by a tax on money it never made. We've seen an electoral calendar pushed onto a region where public servants can't even afford food.
Yeah.
We've seen coffee exporters subsidizing global losses just to buy US dollars for imports. We've seen a massive city threatening a tiny restaurant with a $500,000 burr environmental fee. And we've seen neighbors defeat a developer's formal property title over a bulldozed parking spot.
The through line is unmistakable.
So what does this all mean for you? Whether you're analyzing a national economy, running a business, or just trying to understand how societies transition, it's a masterclass in systemic friction. A policy, no matter how beautifully drafted or logically sound in a ministry office, will fail if it ignores the economic mechanics and human realities on the ground. You cannot mandate away reality.
And I'll leave you with a final thought to mull over. We just discussed how informal practices successfully overrode formal property laws in a single apartment building. If the highest court in the land is allowing informal agreements to dictate the control of a parking lot, what does that mean for how massive nationwide regulations like the minimum alternative tax or the city's green crackdown will actually be enforced on the streets when they face resistance from millions of citizens in the years to come?
That is a brilliant question to end on. The mandates are written, but the reality on the streets is rewriting the rules. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the pages of Addis Fortune. Until next time, keep reading and keep questioning. Goodbye.